December 1941. The Hawaiian sun beats down mercilessly on Ewa mooring mast field, where rows of stubby fighter planes sit like forgotten relics on the coral dust parking apron. These are Brewster Buffaloes, aircraft that most pilots whisper about with barely concealed contempt, fat, slow, and already obsolete before they even left the factory. The Navy had rejected them after disappointing carrier trials. The Marine Corps got stuck with them, the unwanted stepchildren of American military aviation. And Lieutenant James Parker, fresh from flight school at Pensacola with dreams of aerial glory and dogfighting aces, finds himself assigned to pilot one of these flying embarrassments. Parker stands beside his assigned aircraft, Buffalo number 17, running his hand along the thick fuselage that feels almost grotesquely oversized. The plane looks nothing like the sleek fighters he'd studied in training manuals, nothing like the Wildcats or the British Spitfires he'd seen in newsreels. It's rotund, almost comical in its proportions, with a greenhouse canopy that turns the cockpit into an oven under the Pacific sun. The landing gear looks too short, giving the whole aircraft a squatting, ungainly appearance. Other pilots walk past, some offering sympathetic glances, others barely hiding their smirks. Everyone knows the Buffalo's reputation. In Europe, the Finns had some success with them against outdated Soviet aircraft, but against modern Japanese fighters like the Zero, these machines are considered death traps waiting to happen. Parker's disappointment runs deep. He'd graduated near the top of his flight class, had dreamed of flying something prestigious, something that would make his father proud. His father, a decorated pilot from the Great War, still talks about the thrill of dogfighting in nimble biplanes over France. Now Parker finds himself assigned to what amounts to an aerial joke, a fighter so maligned that even the mechanics make disparaging comments. He'd seen the performance specifications, had read the classified reports from observers in Asia. The Buffalo was slower than the Zero, couldn't climb as fast, couldn't turn as tight. On paper, it was inferior in almost every measurable way. The weight of disappointment settles on his shoulders like physical burden as he walks around the aircraft, conducting his first inspection. The paint is already fading in the tropical sun, patches of corrosion visible around rivets and panel seams. The fabric-covered control surfaces show wear. This isn't the gleaming machine of his dreams. This is a compromise, a makeshift solution, a second-rate aircraft for what everyone assumes will be a second-rate theater of operations if war comes. But something his father once told him echoes in his memory. During a rare moment of vulnerability, his father had admitted that the aircraft he'd flown in the Great War wasn't the best either, that German planes often had advantages in speed or climb rate. But he'd survived and succeeded because he'd learned his aircraft completely, had understood its strengths and limitations better than his opponents understood theirs. A superior aircraft flown by a mediocre pilot will lose to an inferior aircraft flown by someone who knows every rivet and wire of his machine. That memory plants a seed in Parker's mind, a small kernel of possibility that begins to grow despite the discouragement all around him. If you're enjoying this story of determination against overwhelming odds, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It helps us bring you more incredible true stories from history. Parker's squadron commander, Major Thomas Hendricks, is a veteran of the last war, a man whose weathered face carries the weight of too many lost friends and too many close calls. He'd flown observation planes over the Western Front, had seen the devastation of modern war up close. Now, in his early 40s, considered too old by some for fighter command, he's been given the responsibility of molding young pilots into a fighting force with equipment that everyone knows is inadequate. Hendricks gathers the Buffalo pilots in the briefing room on Parker's third day at Ewa, where the air is thick with humidity and unspoken anxiety. The major stands before a large map of the Pacific, his pointer tapping various locations as he speaks. Intelligence reports indicate Japanese forces are preparing for something big. Their carrier fleet has disappeared from monitoring. Radio traffic suggests major operations being planned. War is coming, maybe in months, maybe weeks, maybe days, and when it does, they'll be flying Buffaloes against Zeros, one of the most advanced fighters in the world. The comparison is brutal, and Hendricks doesn't sugarcoat it. He puts the specifications side by side on the blackboard. The Zero can do 340 miles per hour at optimal altitude. The Buffalo manages maybe 300 on a good day with a tailwind. The Zero can turn inside anything in the sky. The Buffalo handles like a truck in comparison. The Zero is flown by pilots who've been combat tested in China, men with hundreds of hours fighting experience. Most of the pilots in this room have never fired their guns at anything that could shoot back. The silence in the briefing room is oppressive. Parker watches his fellow pilots, sees the fear and resignation in their faces. Lieutenant Morrison, sitting 2 rows ahead, has her jaw set in that determined way she gets when someone tells her she can't do something. Lieutenant Davidson, a hotshot from Texas who'd bragged about his natural flying ability, looks pale and shaken. Captain Wong, the only pilot in the squadron with actual combat experience from flying as a volunteer in China, stares at the board with an unreadable expression. But then Hendricks says something that Parker will never forget. Words that cut through the defeatist atmosphere like a blade. An aircraft is just a machine made of metal and fabric and systems. But a pilot is the heart that makes it live or die. The Buffalo has weaknesses, serious ones that can't be ignored or wished away. But it also has strengths that most pilots haven't bothered to discover because they're too busy complaining. Rugged construction that can take damage, heavy armor around the pilot and engine, powerful guns, 4 Browning .50 calibers that can shred anything they hit. The Buffalo won't win turning dogfights, Hendricks admits, but warfare isn't about fighting on your enemy's terms. It's about forcing them to fight on yours. He tells them about tactics used by inferior forces throughout history, how the underdog wins by refusing to play by the established rules. The Buffalo can't turn with a 0, so don't try. Use diving attacks, boom and zoom, hit hard and fast, and run before they can retaliate. Use altitude advantage, discipline, teamwork. Make every shot count because you won't get many chances. And most importantly, survive. Dead heroes don't win wars. Survivors who learn from each engagement and come back smarter, those are the ones who eventually triumph. The briefing continues for another hour. Hendricks outlining tactical concepts, discussing how they'll need to fight smarter rather than just harder. He emphasizes energy management, the importance of maintaining speed, the value of team tactics over individual heroics. It's not glamorous, not the kind of romantic dogfighting that Parker had dreamed about, but it makes sense in a cold, logical way. Parker takes these words to heart in a way that surprises even himself. That night, lying in his bunk in the officers' quarters while other pilots play cards and drink, he thinks about Hendricks' briefing, about the challenge of turning disadvantage into advantage. He'd always been analytical, had excelled in the classroom portions of flight school even more than the stick and rudder parts. Now that analytical mind sees a problem that needs solving, a puzzle with life or death stakes. The next morning, while most pilots sleep off hangovers, Parker is already at the flight line, sitting in number 17's cockpit with a clipboard and every technical manual he could find in the base library. He studies the systems diagrams, traces fuel lines and electrical circuits, memorizes the performance charts at different altitudes and configurations. The Buffalo has a Wright R1820 Cyclone engine putting out 1,200 horsepower, which sounds impressive until you consider the aircraft weighs over 6,000 pounds fully loaded. Power-to-weight ratio is poor, but that's a known quantity. What matters is understanding exactly what performance he can extract from that equation. He flies training missions with a single-minded intensity, taking careful notes after each flight. How does the Buffalo behave at different speeds? At what altitude does engine performance fall off? How much speed can he gain in a dive? And how much altitude does he need to recover? What's the tightest turn he can make before the controls get mushy and the stall warning starts shaking the stick? Other pilots fly their required hours and call it done. Parker flies every chance he gets, accumulating knowledge with each mission, building an intuitive understanding of the aircraft that goes beyond what any manual can teach. His dedication doesn't go unnoticed, particularly by Sergeant Robert Chen, the crew chief assigned to maintain Parker's aircraft. Chen is a fascinating character himself, a second-generation Chinese-American who'd grown up in San Francisco's Chinatown, son of immigrants who'd worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. He'd joined the Marines to prove his American identity, to show that despite his ancestry, he was just as much a part of this country as anyone born here. Aviation mechanics had been his calling, and he maintains the Buffaloes with almost religious devotion, taking personal affront when pilots disparage the aircraft. He works so hard to keep airworthy. Most pilots treat their crew chiefs with casual disregard, seeing them as servants rather than partners. Parker is different. He notices immediately that number 17 runs smoother than the other Buffaloes, that Chen has tuned the engine to perfection, balanced the propeller, adjusted the rigging to minimize drag. After his first flight, Parker finds Chen and spends 30 minutes discussing every aspect of the aircraft's performance, asking technical questions that most pilots wouldn't even think of. Chen is surprised, then intrigued, then genuinely enthusiastic. Here's a pilot who actually cares about the machine, who wants to understand it rather than just complain about it. They form an unlikely partnership that deepens over the following weeks. Parker provides detailed feedback after every flight, noting every vibration, every hesitation, every quirk in the aircraft's behavior. Chen makes adjustments, sometimes within regulation parameters, sometimes pushing the boundaries of what the technical orders officially allow. Together they discover things about the Buffalo that aren't in any manual. The aircraft, despite its poor high-altitude performance, is actually quite stable at low levels, where air density provides better control authority. Its heavy weight, usually cited as a disadvantage, makes it an excellent gun platform with less recoil deviation. Those 450 caliber Brownings, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, can put out a combined rate of fire that's absolutely devastating. The Buffalo won't dance through the sky like a Zero, but if Parker can get those guns on target, even for a second or two, the results will be catastrophic for whatever he's shooting at. Chen shows Parker tricks known only to experienced mechanics. How to identify engine problems by sound before gauges show anything wrong. How to manage engine temperature during hard maneuvering, where the aircraft's structure is strongest and can take damage, and where a single hit might prove catastrophic. It's knowledge born from hundreds of hours working on these machines, the kind of practical expertise that no training course teaches. Parker also learns about Chen's personal stake in the coming war. Chen's family still has relatives in China, in regions occupied by Japanese forces. Letters from overseas, when they arrive at all, tell stories of atrocities, of civilians caught in the crossfire of empire and resistance. For Chen, maintaining these Buffaloes isn't just a job, it's personal. Every aircraft he keeps flying is another weapon that might, somehow, help end the occupation of his ancestral homeland. The shared sense of purpose creates a bond between pilot and mechanic that goes beyond the usual professional relationship. When Parker climbs into Number 17's cockpit, he knows Chen has done everything humanly possible to make that aircraft ready, and Chen knows that Parker won't waste that preparation through carelessness or bravado. It's a partnership built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence, even in the face of impossible odds. Parker begins developing tactics specifically designed for the Buffalo's unique combination of strengths and weaknesses. He studies every scrap of information he can find about aerial combat, reading reports from Europe, where the war is already raging, analyzing accounts from China, where Japanese and Chinese pilots have been fighting for years. He studies the German tactics that decimated the Poles and French, the British developments that kept the RAF alive during the Battle of Britain. He reads translated documents about Japanese training methods, their emphasis on maneuverability and aggressive offense. From all this research, patterns emerge. The Japanese pilots, supremely confident in their agile Zeros, often press attacks aggressively, sometimes recklessly. They expect opponents to try matching them in turning combat, and they've developed their entire tactical doctrine around exploiting superior maneuverability. But what if Buffalo pilots refuse to play that game? What if they use disciplined boom and zoom tactics instead, attacking from above with the diving speed that the Buffalo's weight actually facilitates, firing in one devastating pass, then using that diving momentum to escape before the Zeros could leverage their turning advantage? The key is altitude and discipline. Never get into a turning fight. Always maintain energy. Always know where your wingman is. Always have an escape route planned before you commit to an attack. These become the core principles of Parker's developing tactical framework. It's not glamorous or heroic in the traditional sense. No spiraling dogfights or desperate last-second victories. It's calculated, almost mathematical, a way of fighting that emphasizes survival and effectiveness over glory. He shares these ideas with his squadron mates during informal sessions after evening mess. Some listen with interest. Others dismiss him as an inexperienced rookie trying to polish a turd to make something viable out of an aircraft that's fundamentally broken. The resistance is frustrating but understandable. These men have been trained in traditional fighter tactics, the kind of aggressive dogfighting that's been the hallmark of aerial combat since the Great War. Parker is asking them to abandon that doctrine, to fight defensively and cautiously, with an aircraft that seems to demand caution. But a few pilots take his theories seriously. Lieutenant Morrison is one of them. Sarah Morrison is one of the handful of women who'd managed to earn her wings before the war, fighting through prejudice and discrimination at every stage of her career. She'd been rejected by Navy aviation outright, had barely been accepted by the Marines, and then only because the shortage of pilots had made their standards more flexible. Even now, she faces constant skepticism. Pilots who assume she can't handle the physical demands of combat flying, superiors who question whether women have the temperament for warfare. Morrison had proven herself through sheer excellence, graduating from flight school with perfect scores in navigation and gunnery, matching or exceeding most of her male classmates in flying performance. But still, the doubts persist, the whispers, the subtle and not so subtle suggestions that she doesn't belong. It's made her sharp, analytical, someone who learned early that she couldn't rely on acceptance or benefit of the doubt. She had to be better, had to prove herself constantly, had to find advantages where others saw only obstacles. When Parker presents his tactical theories, Morrison sees something familiar in them. This is the same kind of thinking she's applied her entire career, finding ways to succeed when the system is stacked against you, turning weaknesses into strengths through intelligence and discipline. They begin spending hours together, developing coordinated tactics, practicing radio discipline, perfecting their mutual support techniques. They develop a two-ship fighting doctrine specifically for the Buffalo's capabilities. One pilot maintains high altitude, acting as the eyes and bouncer, calling out threats and diving to support when needed. The other operates lower, attacking targets of opportunity but always with the high pilot ready to intervene. They never separate by more than a few thousand feet, never let enemy fighters get between them, always position themselves so that shooting at one buffalo means exposing yourself to the other. It requires trust, the kind of absolute faith in your wingman that can only come from extensive training together. They fly mission after mission, rehearsing intercepts, practicing communications, developing an almost intuitive sense of where the other pilot is and what they're planning. Major Hendricks watches these training sessions with growing interest, occasionally joining them in his own buffalo to observe and provide feedback. The Major recognizes something valuable developing. Parker and Morrison are demonstrating that intelligent tactics can compensate for inferior equipment, that disciplined teamwork can create advantages that raw performance cannot. He begins incorporating their techniques into squadron training, making their two-ship tactics the foundation of the entire unit's fighting doctrine. Not everyone embraces the new methods. Some pilots, particularly the more aggressive personalities, chafe against the discipline required. They want to dogfight, to prove themselves in swirling combat, to rack up kills in spectacular fashion. Parker's tactics seem cowardly to them, running away after one pass, refusing to stay and fight. There are arguments, some heated, about what constitutes proper fighter-pilot behavior. Morrison faces additional resistance, pilots who attribute the cautious tactics to feminine timidity, who suggest that a male pilot wouldn't advocate for such defensive fighting. It's frustrating and exhausting, having to justify not just the tactics, but her right to even have an opinion. But she perseveres, and slowly, grudgingly, more pilots begin to see the value in what Parker and Morrison are developing. Captain Wong, the China veteran, becomes an important ally. Wong had flown against the Japanese in obsolete aircraft, had watched friends die when they tried to turn fight Zeros, had learned through bitter experience that surviving against superior opposition requires swallowing your pride and fighting smart. He provides real-world validation for Parker's theories, sharing stories of successful tactics against the Japanese, confirming that the boom and zoom approach can work when applied with discipline. Together, Parker, Morrison, and Wong form the core of a new tactical philosophy within the squadron. They run training exercises, demonstrating intercept techniques, showing how Buffalo pilots can effectively engage even superior fighters if they stick to their strengths. Chen keeps their aircraft in perfect mechanical condition, often working through the night to ensure number 17 and Morrison's Buffalo are always ready to fly. The days blur into routine as November becomes December. Training flights at dawn when the air is cool and smooth, the ocean below reflecting the first light of morning. Maintenance work in the brutal midday heat, Parker often helping Chen with tasks, learning the mechanical intimacy of his aircraft. Briefings in the afternoon, reviewing intelligence reports, discussing potential scenarios. The tension builds steadily as intelligence reports grow more ominous. The Japanese carrier fleet has vanished from surveillance. Radio intercepts suggest mobilization. Diplomatic relations deteriorate daily. Everyone knows something is coming, but where and when remains a mystery. Parker writes letters home during quiet evenings, trying to explain his life to family members who can't really understand what he's facing. His father writes back with encouragement and advice from his own combat experience, letters that Parker reads and rereads. His mother sends care packages with homemade cookies that arrive crushed but still taste like childhood. His younger sister writes about her nursing studies, about the family's new puppy, about boys she's dating and movies she's seen. Normal life in a world that seems increasingly distant from the reality at Ewa Field. Then December 7th arrives, and routine explodes into chaos with the kind of sudden violence that marks the border between peace and war. Parker is off duty that Sunday morning, taking advantage of the rare rest day. He'd planned to sleep in, but old habits die hard, and he wakes at dawn anyway. Unable to fall back asleep, he dresses and heads to the mess hall for breakfast, finding it mostly empty. Most pilots are sleeping off Saturday night's festivities at the officers' club. Parker eats alone, scrambled eggs and toast and coffee, reading a week-old newspaper from the mainland that discusses the possibility of war in theoretical terms, as if it's an abstract concept rather than an approaching reality. After breakfast, he returns to his quarters with a fresh cup of coffee and the letters from home he's been meaning to answer. His room is Spartan, military-issue furniture and little decoration beyond a few photographs. One shows him with his family at his flight school graduation, everyone smiling, proud, unaware of what's coming. Another shows him standing beside number 17, Chen visible in the background working on the engine. Parker settles into the uncomfortable desk chair, pulls out writing paper and begins composing a letter to his sister. He writes about the beauty of Hawaiian mornings, about the palm trees and the constant sound of surf, trying to paint a picture of paradise, even while knowing that paradise is about to become a battlefield. His pen moves slowly, searching for words that won't worry her while still being honest about his life. He's in the middle of describing a recent training flight when the first explosions roll across the base like distant thunder. Parker's first thought is that someone has dropped something in a maintenance hangar, maybe an engine fell from a hoist. But the sound continues, growing louder, and there's something wrong about it, something that makes his combat-trained instincts start screaming warnings. He sets down his coffee cup and walks to the window, looking out across the base toward the flight line. What he sees will be burned into his memory forever. Aircraft, dozens of them, approaching in neat formations from the north. At first glance, they might be American, might be a training exercise no one mentioned. But then, Parker sees the red circles on the wings, the rising sun emblems of Japan, and reality crashes down with the weight of inevitability. This is it. The war everyone expected, arriving without warning on a peaceful Sunday morning. More explosions now, closer, at nearby Hickam Field, where bombers are parked in neat rows. Columns of black smoke begin rising into the perfect blue Hawaiian sky, dark pillars marking the death of American air power. The surprise is total, devastating, the kind of catastrophic failure that will be analyzed and debated for decades. Parker stands frozen for perhaps 3 seconds, watching the attack unfold with a strange sense of detachment, his mind struggling to process the transition from peace to war, from theoretical possibility to immediate deadly reality. Then training takes over, the months of preparation that make response automatic. He runs from his quarters, still in his casual khaki uniform rather than flight gear, sprinting toward the flight line. Other pilots are emerging from buildings, some still pulling on shirts, expressions ranging from shock to confusion to dawning horror. Explosions continue to bracket the base, getting closer. Parker can see enemy aircraft clearly now, dive bombers peeling off into steep attacks, fighters strafing anything that moves. The flight line is chaos. Explosions have already hit some of the parked Buffaloes, aircraft burning with orange flames and black smoke. Strafing runs send mechanics and ground crew diving for cover behind anything solid. Bullets kick up coral dust in deadly patterns, ricochets whining off concrete and metal. Parker dodges between buildings, heart hammering, lungs burning, driven by the desperate need to reach his aircraft before it's destroyed on the ground. He finds Sergeant Chen already at number 17, the crew chief working with desperate efficiency to prepare the Buffalo for flight, despite the hell breaking loose around him. Fuel truck hoses are being frantically disconnected, wheel chocks being kicked away, the engine already turning over with that distinctive radial engine roar. Chen's face is set in grim determination, focused entirely on his task, despite bullets impacting nearby. This is what all their training has been for, all those hours of maintenance and preparation, and Chen will not let his pilot down even as the world ends around them. Parker reaches the aircraft and Chen shouts something lost in the noise of battle, but his gestures are clear. She's fueled, she's armed, she's ready. Parker doesn't have his flight gear, doesn't have his helmet or goggles or parachute harness properly adjusted, but none of that matters now. He climbs into the cockpit, his movements automatic from months of practice, strapping in while his eyes scan the instruments, confirming everything is green, everything is ready. Major Hendricks appears through the smoke, his uniform torn, blood on his face from a superficial wound. He's shouting orders, directing any pilot who can reach their aircraft to get airborne immediately, to engage the enemy however possible, to do something rather than die helplessly on the ground. Most of the Buffaloes are already burning or riddled with bullet holes, reduced to twisted metal and shattered dreams. But a handful remain operational, maybe 6 or 7, scattered across the field, their pilots racing toward them through the chaos. Parker glances one last time at Chen, their eyes meeting across the few feet separating cockpit from ground. No words are needed. Chen raises one hand in a quick salute, then turns and runs for cover as another strafing run tears across the flight line. Parker's hand moves to the throttle, pushing it forward, feeling number 17 surge into motion. The engine catches, roars to life. Parker taxis through debris and smoke, dodging craters, reaching the runway just as a Japanese dive bomber pulls out of its attack run overhead. He doesn't wait for clearance. There's no tower anymore, just the imperative to get airborne before the next wave hits. The Buffalo accelerates slowly, painfully slow compared to the agile Japanese fighters, but it does accelerate, and Parker feels the wheels leave the ground, feels the aircraft climb into the maelstrom. Morrison takes off behind him, her Buffalo struggling into the air trailing smoke from a damaged engine, but still flying. 2 other pilots manage to get airborne, forming a ragged, desperate section. They're climbing into a sky filled with enemy aircraft, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. 4 obsolete Buffaloes against the entire first wave of the Pearl Harbor attack. The odds are suicide. But Parker remembers his training, his study, his tactics. He doesn't panic. Over the radio, he calls his tiny formation together, orders them to gain altitude, to position themselves above the Japanese formations that are turning for another pass at the harbor. The other pilots follow his lead, Perhaps because of discipline, perhaps because desperation demands following someone with a plan. They climb, engines straining as Japanese aircraft swarm below. Parker spots a formation of dive bombers, Val aircraft, pulling out of their runs and reforming for the flight back to their carriers. They're vulnerable in that moment, focused on rejoining formation, not expecting attack from above. Parker calls his section into a diving attack, exactly the tactic he'd drilled endlessly during training. Number 17 plunges down, speed building rapidly. The Buffalo, heavy and solid, dives like a boulder, quickly overtaking the more nimble but lighter Japanese bombers. Parker centers his gun sight on the nearest Val, watching it grow larger through the port reflector glass. His thumb hovers over the firing button, waiting for the perfect range. Then he presses down, and all 4 Brownings roar to life. The Buffalo shudders with recoil, but holds steady, exactly as Parker had learned during countless practice sessions. Tracers arc out, converge on the Val. The effect is devastating. The Japanese bomber's fuel tank explodes in a fireball, the aircraft disintegrating almost instantly. Parker pulls up hard, using his diving speed to zoom back to altitude before enemy escorts can respond. Behind him, Morrison scores a hit on another bomber, sending it spiraling toward the ocean, trailing smoke. The other 2 Buffalo pilots miss their targets but follow the plan, diving through and extending away rather than trying to turn and fight. It's the only thing that saves them, because now the Zeros are coming, angry hornets defending their formation. The next minutes are a blur of survival. Parker sees a 0 on Morrison's tail, rolls hard, lines up a deflection shot that seems impossible but fires anyway. His bullets catch the Zero's engine, and the Japanese fighter breaks off, trailing white smoke. Another 0 comes at him, head-on, both pilots firing, a deadly game of chicken. Parker holds his course, trusts the Buffalo's armor, and at the last second the 0 breaks, its lighter construction unable to absorb the punishment. Parker's aircraft shudders as bullets strike the armored firewall, but the engine keeps running, Chen's meticulous maintenance paying dividends. The battle rages across the sky above Oahu. Parker's small section can't stop the attack, can't save the ships burning in the harbor, but they can fight, and they do. They use every tactic Parker developed, diving attacks from above, refusing to turn with the more agile Zeros, using their ruggedness to absorb damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. Morrison's damaged Buffalo takes more hits but stays airborne, limping but still dangerous. One of the other pilots isn't so lucky, his aircraft finally succumbing to accumulated damage and falling toward the ocean, trailing fire. Parker feels rage and grief, but he channels it into cold precision. Another diving attack, another Japanese bomber falling from the sky. The Zeros swarm like angry wasps, but Parker and his remaining pilots keep moving, keep fighting, never staying predictable, always using their aircraft's strengths rather than trying to match the enemy's agility. Then, as suddenly as it began, the attack wave breaks off. The Japanese aircraft turn back toward their carriers, their mission accomplished, Pearl Harbor burning behind them. Parker's fuel gauge reads nearly empty. His ammunition counters show 0s across the board. Morrison's Buffalo is barely flying, held together seemingly by willpower alone. But they're alive, and they've proven something important. They land back at Ewa through smoke and chaos. The base is devastated, most of the aircraft destroyed on the ground, hangars burning, casualties being carried to overwhelmed medical facilities. But Sergeant Chen is there, tears of relief streaming down his face as number 17 taxis in, the Buffalo's hide punctured by dozens of bullet holes but still intact. Major Hendricks meets them on the flight line. His expression is grim, the losses are catastrophic, but there's pride there too. 4 Buffaloes got airborne and actually engaged the enemy. Parker's section confirmed 6 enemy aircraft destroyed, possibly more. Against all odds, against an enemy that should have swatted them from the sky like flies, they'd fought and survived. In the days following the attack, as America reels from the shock and mobilizes for war, Parker's actions become a rallying point. The story spreads, the Buffalo pilots who refused to quit, who took America's worst fighter and turned it into a weapon through skill and determination. It's not about the aircraft, people begin to realize. It's about the pilot, the training, the courage to face impossible odds and fight anyway. Parker is promoted, given command of a reconstituted Buffalo squadron. He implements his tactics service-wide, trains new pilots in the art of turning disadvantages into strengths. Not all Buffaloes will survive the coming war. The aircraft truly is outmatched by modern fighters. But the pilots who fly them with intelligence and courage write their own chapter in history. Morrison recovers from minor injuries sustained when her damaged Buffalo finally gave out on landing, and she becomes one of Parker's most trusted instructors, proving repeatedly that skill matters more than gender or aircraft type. Sergeant Chen continues maintaining what Buffaloes remain, each aircraft a testament to the idea that care and expertise can extend the life and effectiveness of even obsolete equipment. Years later after the war, Parker will return to Ewa Mooring Mast Field. The base is different now, rebuilt, modernized. The buffaloes are long gone, melted down for scrap or rusting in forgotten boneyards. But Parker remembers number 17, remembers the feel of its controls, the roar of its engine, the way it responded when pushed to its limits by someone who understood and respected it. He thinks about the lesson he learned in those desperate days of early war, that defeat isn't determined by equipment or odds, but by the courage to fight regardless, to find advantages where others see only weakness, to refuse the easy narrative that some battles can't be won. The Buffalo was never a great fighter, but in the hands of pilots who refused to quit, it was good enough. And sometimes, good enough combined with determination is all you need to change history. The Hawaiian sun sets behind him as Parker stands on the quiet flight line, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and memory. He thinks about the pilots who didn't make it home, about the mechanics like Chen who kept impossible aircraft flying, about all the ordinary people who faced extraordinary circumstances and found within themselves something stronger than fear. The Buffalo may have been America's worst fighter, but the pilots who flew it proved that heart matters more than hardware, that courage can turn any weapon into a tool of victory, and that sometimes the greatest triumphs come not from having the best equipment, but from refusing to let poor equipment become an excuse for surrender. That's the real story of the Brewster Buffalo, not a tale of a failed aircraft, but a testament to human determination, to the pilots who looked at a machine everyone else had written off and decided to prove the doubters wrong. In their hands, for one shining moment above Pearl Harbor, the Buffalo roared.